the range of issues in gender that transgender persons and those who identify as women within the LGBTIT continuum face, and the kind of path ahead each of us, many of us, different paths that we are charting out for ourselves. So I shall begin with the beginning of the life cycle. The speakers earlier, like Uma Sudhir Garu and Professor Nagamallika, did cover many issues. I'm particularly reminded of Uma Sudhir ji's reference to children, newborn infants, newborn babies. Often when there is, if not always, there is definitely a lot of pressure on parents, particularly mothers, to give birth to male babies, quote unquote male, not, and the very definitions of male and female are questioned now, with many of us questioning the very model of biological essentialism, which merely defines male as a person, a child, baby, being born with male genitalia and female with female genitalia and so on. But what happens when a baby, a new infant, is born with either possibility A, no genitalia, both genitalia, ambiguous genitalia, and there are many other permutations and combinations. Often such newborn infants are, the parents, particularly the mother, parents as well, the family find themselves in a quagmire of stigma, unable to tell people, put a label. We are obsessed with labeling everybody as either male, female, or be it gender, be it caste, class. Labeling is quite a phenomenon. Unable to label the baby, often if not always, such newborn intersex infants are often left in the hospital, and they become either part of the baby racket, baby mafia, or they are left in dustbins, or are left, are just sold away, because there's always a demand for fresh organ harvesting, organ trafficking, because the younger the better, or are left at the threshold of a place of worship like a temple or a mosque or a church or any other gurdwara, any other place of worship, or this too happens very often. Such babies are hijra communities called, and the baby is just handed over to that hijra community, saying that, oh, we unfortunately have given birth to one of yours community members. So this begins at birth for many, if not all, transgender persons. But again, this is just not about our bodies, because there are many transgender persons who are not intersex. In mathematics, we have sets and Venn diagrams where the point of intersection between transgender is defined as how a person wishes to identify himself or herself or themselves, and how that person wants the society to identify him, her, or them. And for the sheer paucity of time, there are many pronouns and diverse ways in which people identify themselves, and I'm just barely using 3 different pronouns. However, intersex infants, intersex people could be transgender, may or may not necessarily be transgender. Not all transgender persons are born into intersex bodies, and not all intersex persons identify as transgender. Now, what separates intersex persons from transgender is the fact that non-intersex transgender persons could identify, there could be a conflict in the minds of the self-identifying transgender person who's non-intersex, a conflict in terms of the gender assigned to that person. Incidentally, unfortunately, often gender is assigned. Universally, it is assigned. Babies are told, you are a girl, you are a boy, you wear pink, you wear blue, or whatever. I mean, gender binaries, false, shallow gender binaries. Now, in non-intersex transgender people like me, I'm not born into an intersex body. I was very much born into a male body, although I did not identify at all as male. this kind of conflict that exists is what psychologists have in America called gender dysphoria, and the World Health Organization, which follows a different model, calls it gender incongruence, and which was earlier pathologized. It was pathologized earlier. Pathology, study of diseases and disorders. Now, with the advancement and with the breakthroughs in sciences, and the sheer fact that this model of this discipline of biological essentialism is itself questioned, we have advanced to understand that this is just a condition as much as somebody is fair, somebody is dark, somebody is tall, somebody is short. This is just a difference in diversity. Quickly now moving on to the challenges we face. I shall dwell upon them in the next 5 minutes and then take you through the different parts, because there's no one part. As much as there's a huge diversity among women across ability, disability, caste, class, language, and faith, and so on, and an intersection of all of this, because women and people, men, women, transgender persons, and persons have intersectional identities. They're not just women, they could be similarly transgender persons are just not, we are just not our gender, we are so much more than that. Beginning with the fact that what is given and available, for example, Aadhaar card, voter ID card, all of these are given. Many of our transgender folks, it's quite a struggle to get these, all despite the fact that quote-unquote comprehensive laws now enacted Transgender Persons Protection Rights Act, but this was enacted very recently in 2019. Until then, to just get an Aadhaar card, to just get a voter ID card, transgender persons, including me, myself, we had to go through a series of humiliations because government offices are clueless to the entry points of access to education, access to life. Without education, there's no livelihood. So the very entry point is closed, because either at birth or during childhood, children are either abandoned or unable to bear the domestic violence. And domestic violence is defined very differently in the Domestic Violence Act, but children, queer, transgender children, as much as children with disabilities, face a lot of stigma, rejection, and in various forms. So often they run away from their homes. So what is available for such children? Where do such children go? Where do such youth go? Historically, traditionally, there are just two to three sources of livelihood. One, begging, institutionalized or otherwise. Two, sex work. Often we have seen transgender persons standing at traffic signals, at some nooks and crannies, soliciting men, soliciting clients. Third, which is not on a regular basis, which is more perhaps once a month or once a fortnight, is to be given alms as on auspicious and festive occasions, or like birth ceremonies, cradle ceremonies, weddings, and so on, which don't happen on a daily, weekly basis. They may happen on a monthly basis. So the mainstay of livelihoods have mostly been begging and sex work. And please, let's also be aware that these have been criminalized mostly across states. Although some states have decriminalized them, they're yet criminalized at a large scale. Pushed to the fringes and margins of society, I repeat, it's akin to a draconian pre-colonial, pre-constitutional Criminal Tribes Act, which just said that certain tribes are by definition criminal, regardless of whether or not they indulge in criminal action. The Telangana Eunuchs Act gave sweeping powers to the police, the state, particularly the police, to arrest without a warrant, to create a register of eunuchs across every police station. Eunuchs, this is not a term that I use, this I'm just quoting out of the law, quote unquote eunuch. Eunuch defined as a person of a male body in female attire, could be arrested without a warrant, and if found in the company of a child, I repeat, if found in the company of a child, should be arrested without a warrant. Can transgender persons not be tuition teachers, not be music teachers, not be dance teachers, Can they not be teaching children? Should a transgender person found in the company of a child only be a presupposition of crime? Should that apply? Why? No. As much as women and men could be tuition teachers, dance teachers, school teachers, transgender persons are also capable of teaching children. And if found in the company of a child, it does not mean that they are child traffickers. So in 2018, in February, I challenged through Vaijayanti Vasantava. We first wrote a set of representations, but they just bit the dust. So we moved the High Court, and thankfully a bench of then Justice Totatil Radhakrishnan and Justice Kongara Vijayalakshmi stayed the Telangana Eunuchs Act. It is now in ICU, and we want it to die. It's yet not been decriminalized, and it has not been completely decriminalized, but it's been stayed. Now I'll very quickly move on to the choices transgender persons and queer women have made to live their lives independently. There are very many cases across India. I shall just quote a few. One of, these names are sanitized because it is very difficult for queer women and transgender persons in India to form consensual relationships with their lovers, with their partners. Often in villages, districts, and even in cities, villages are the cases that have come about more. There are very many cases like this, but I shall share one for the sheer paucity of time. Two consenting adults who are identified as women, both who are 24, 25, who've known each other, who've studied together, were in love, of the same village. The parents got to know it was almost broke loose. One of the parents of one of the person tried to be supportive. They couldn't understand it immediately, but at the end of the day, it's their own child. So they were trying to understand and be supportive. The parents of the other girl just couldn't stomach this fact. So there are increasing cases of vigilantism where the police forces, the constitutional machinery set aside, and the village forms vigilante kangaroo courts through the panchayat. The sarpanch was livid that hamari ma ulla itla iddar aadollu itla chestuntaru. How dare ye ladkiyan kaise ek dusre se ishq vishq kar rahi hain. And the entire village descended on the home of these two girls, trying to break open those doors. And even by then, they had approached the women's safety wing. There were two police constables there already. And the police constables are telling these women, because they're inside with the parents, and they're telling through the windows, they're saying, there's a mob of almost 100 people who's come with crowbars and bamboos to break open the doors. The two constables are saying, oh, मैं हीरो लमा, क्या हम हीरो हैं कि 150 लोगों से हम लड़ सकते हैं? So these two women, thankfully we were able to rescue them, and thankfully these two persons rather moved the High Court. I shall not name because the details are sanitized and we redacted the case, but moved the High Court where police protection was offered to them from the police and by the police. And the parents on the other side who were trying to break in were restrained. Cases got filed on them. And there are very many such cases, intersectional cases of interstate, intercaste, interfaith, Hindu-Muslim, Dalit-Muslim, AP, Odisha. Now there's another new phenomenon with the advancement in technology, apps, social media, which is I think very welcome, but it makes it very difficult for activists and for NGOs. There are thankfully also cases of love between queer women from as far away as Jammu Kashmir, Telangana, as far away as Gujarat, Nagaland, and but the complexities of these cases, because the parents file a habeas corpus in Gujarat, and can you imagine the couple has to travel all the way from Nagaland to Gujarat to go and quash that habeas corpus case. Or another thing is, if nothing works, if kidnapping doesn't work, parents, I don't entirely blame parents because it's sheer lack of awareness, fear that वो पता नहीं वो कौन है, वो शायद एक दलाल है, दल्ला है, वो मेरी बेटी को बेचने वाली है. So they file cases of trafficking on the lover. So it's also, there's no history of trafficking. These two have are consenting adults, also educated graduates, postgraduates with jobs, and so on. So look at the complexities of how litigation is getting difficult and more difficult, because the FIRs will need to get quashed on the other end of the country in a different state far away. So now we are doing some interesting work to consolidate all these kind of cases, so that you know, consenting adult queer couples don't have to travel from one end of India to the other, such that all these cases, that there could be some guidelines framed in the Supreme Court, which is very important. And how do we do this? I think movements adopt from each other. From the women's rights movement, the jurisprudence of prevention of sexual harassment, thanks to Vishaka, thanks to Babri Devi. From the disability rights movement, the jurisprudence of reasonable accommodation for employers. Reasonable accommodation, but what is reasonable for the employer may not be reasonable for the employee. So again, the disability rights movement gives us a framework to say that there has to be some minimum statutory standards. And I'll close it with the part that such couples are now, the different parts that couples, persons are now charting for themselves. There's much talk about reservations for, anti, and a lot in between. But for communities and for all, insofar as something is available to a few for certain grounds, it should be also available for others facing similar stigma. I'm not taking an ideological stand deliberately here. I'm only taking a jurisprudential stand, and nothing is binary. The worst disservice is to say it's either this or that and nothing in between. There was also opposition when EWS, economically weak sections, was introduced. Much was said, but now even the reality right now is that even those who were earlier unable to access reservation on grounds of caste, insofar as they come from any caste, insofar as they are from economically weak sections, have a white ration card, are able to access that reservation. Now, what crime have transgender persons done? The way reservation is shown is backward, I mean, we know it's a table, right? Backward caste A female, backward caste B female, backward caste C female, SC female, ST scheduled tribe female. Within vertical caste-based reservation, there is an existing horizontal reservation based on gender, because it separates women from men and ensures women don't compete with men and men compete with each other. Now we have a whole new harvest of transgender persons, 6 that I'm aware, who've applied for jobs with the police forces. They were born in male bodies. Their 10th class certificate has male. They transitioned some 5, 6, 10 years ago, the youngest being 24, the oldest being 30. So, and in the police notification says apply in accordance with your 10th class certificate. So in the 10th class certificate, they were all male, yeah, and they are forced to apply as male. There is no option for transgender yet, despite 9 years of the Nalsa judgment, 4 years of the Comprehensive Transgender Person Protection Act, and 3 years of the rules being enacted. The state of Telangana is a non-starter, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it's a non-starter. And hence, they're force-fitted to apply as male. Can you imagine trans women who have no testosterone, who have no male genitalia, competing with men in physical events? It is wantonly, sadistically setting them up for failure. So they all moved to the High Court. Thankfully, they got some relief. It's not complete relief yet. So these are the boundaries that trans women are pushing to break, bastions that they're trying to break. Then there are doctors, transgender women who are doctors, who are too employed now with the Osmania General Hospital, and they want to study further. When they apply, they are being subsumed under women. Women have a different struggle. The struggles of cis het women are very different from the struggles of trans women. They are not completely different, but they are not identical. They are not identical. So here as well, with the police constables, the interim order has come through. Justice Nanda delivered it, and we are yet waiting for its sub judice. When with the doctors too, the final judgment was delivered, and the division bench of Justice Abhinandan Kumar Shavali delivered a judgment that the state must frame a comprehensive policy, but most of these judgments are barely implemented. Eventually, these petitioners, and I did my bit in trying to mobilize all of this, collectivize them, and then send them to court. And before they go to court, they have to exhaust all the options of giving representations, right? Now, very precious little comes out of this. Eventually, they'll have to file contempt petitions, and eventually, they may even have to go to the Supreme Court. So, I'm trying to tell you that much that is given and available to many is not available to some. Fine. Or next, we have harvest a fresh crop of young transgender lawyers, young transgender journalists are in the making, but they haven't graduated yet. Police, they are in the making, they are getting ready for it. Doctors are already there in Osmania General Hospital. And some of you may have watched the film Jai, which is based on custodial violence of people based on caste, based on how crime is foisted on them. We have many such stories, one of which is already there in the Madras High Court. The decriminalization of homosexuality happened finally through the 377 judgment in 2018, Navpreet Singh Johar and others versus Union of India. But before that, the very first time it happened was in 2009 in Nas Foundation and others versus NCT versus Union of India. Now this just didn't fall out of heaven. This just didn't fall. It didn't come from just some Harvard Law School lawyers I won't name them, who were involved in 377. No. Yes, they had a contribution, but the significant foundations of this were laid on the burning pyres of trans women. Jayalakshmi versus State of Tamil Nadu of 2004-5 in the Madras High Court was Justice Ajit Prakash Shah. This was a case like Jai Bhim, where Pandiyamma, 18-and-a-quarter-year-old transgender woman, was caught for begging and for receiving alms, and was a petty crime. Her bail condition was that she must appear in the police station every day. During those 3 months that she had to appear every day, something was severely going wrong until one day she told her mother 3 months later that she's being repeatedly sexually assaulted by the SI and the constables with their body parts as well as with lathis. And when the mother and Pandiyamma's sister came to the police, unable to believe this, Pandiyamma's sister and mother came to the police station. The SI and the constable say, now we can have a go with both these women too. Until then, Pandiyamma, it was all about herself. It was all about her trauma that she had internalized, and people try to make peace with their violence. I mean, quote unquote, make peace with their violence to exist, to subsist, but they can't tolerate even a scratch on their dear ones. So, unable to deal with this, she doused herself with petrol and set herself ablaze in the police station, in the Vaisarapadi police station. She eventually died 1 week later, but during that 1 week of her ordeal, she told the government doctors, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to me. I was being repeatedly sexually assaulted, and then the specter of my mother and sister being sexually assaulted, I couldn't take it anymore. And eventually those police officers had to face the law. And who was the judge in the Madras High Court in 2004-5? It was Justice Ajit Prakash Shah. That was the crystallization of that judicial mind, because he saw that trauma of trans people, which eventually prepared him to deliver a historic judgment, perhaps in Nas Foundation. So these judgments, historic judgments, were built on the pyres, on the graves of trans women, trans persons. On this note, I exhort you to now open up your minds and your selves to give, to ensure that all marginalized communities, trans women, queer women, persons with disabilities, people repressed on grounds of caste, all marginalized communities get their rightful share, not through charity, but what is rightfully theirs, And if there's only one thing that separates us or from the rest, you from the rest, me from the rest, all of us from the rest, because all of us have certain privileges and certain disprivileges, all of us. It would vary in degree. It is just opportunity. Thank you.